Thanks for joining us today on Uptime Logistics, powered by CAP Logistics. And I am your host, Doug Draper, with the Denver Transportation Club. We have a phenomenal guest today. He is Pete Mento with Crowe LLP. So Pete, thanks for joining us today.
Entirely my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, great. And I appreciate it. I know you're in New York City today getting things wrapped up from the week, so thanks for joining.
My pleasure.
Yeah, we like to learn a little bit about our guests. So before we jump into our topic, which is really going to be focused around Uptime Logistics and the ins, the outs, the do's and the don'ts as it relates to import, supply chain, kind of what's going on in the world right now, the craziness and how things changed almost daily with managing your supply chain as it relates to imports. So that's kind of our topic, and you were certainly the expert. So tell us a little bit about yourself so our audience knows more about you.
Sure. I have a pretty bizarre background. Wow, how far back should I go? I was born in West Texas. I grew up in Texas. My family moved me to New Hampshire when I was a teenager. And because I had no other outlet, I screwed up all my college applications. I ended up going to a Merchant Marine Academy. I went to Maine Maritime Academy, where I took all the proper academic courses to be a ship officer. So I was supposed to go to sea and be a deck officer, but it became evident to anybody who was paying attention that I was god-awful at it.
Yeah.
So I stopped going to sea and decided to pursue a career as a full-time stand-up comedian. And I did that for quite some time. It's pretty good. I thought I was pretty good.
Yeah.
I still think I'm pretty funny. But unfortunately, I kind of got sick of living in Chevy Astro vans and days inns and beating people up to get paid.
Yeah.
So I stopped working on the road and went to graduate school at Harvard University and studied trade theory. And along the way, got some amazing jobs in the forwarding industry, where I found out that there wasn't a lot of people paying attention to trade compliance from the perspective of duty minimization, particularly not globally. So I kind of made that my thing. And many people who are listening to this who know me from my time at Expeditors Trade One. I ran the organization for almost 8 years. Left there to go to C.H. Robinson. Very fortunate to have worked for that great organization for a while. I was a partner with Ryan, where I ran there. I had a lot of jobs. And was recently at Crane. Great job, great people. And for the past 3 months, I've been here at Crowe. With the trade war that came about, got a pretty weird set of skills, and so do the guys that work with me. And there's never been people paying more in duties and taxes regarding international trade. So we were in very, very high demand in the tax space. Have us come back, get the band back together, help people avoid paying those taxes.
That's great. That's terrific. So before we jump in, your backstory is pretty interesting. So what's the best club that you performed at or performed in during your comedic career?
I'm super proud of the fact that I got to play at the Comedy Connection in Boston. That was a really big deal to me, being a Boston guy. And then I did play at Dangerfields in New York, which was also a really big deal to me.
Nice.
So played a lot of colleges and did a lot of that stuff. Bombed a lot. Got on stage and had people not think I was funny. And what's hysterical is now that when I do comedy now, I'm not doing it to pay my rent. So I have so much more to say, and it's generally a lot funnier than when I was in my 20s. But
yeah,
that dream is dead, my friend.
Yeah.
I'm just a balding, middle-aged, pear-shaped economist now talking about it.
Well, it takes one to know one. If you, since we're both challenged in the follicle situation. So anyway, we always like to talk about uptime in buckets. It's easy to kind of grasp. There's it's such a large topic, and it can really be intimidating. So we're going to talk about it in different buckets. And obviously, we need to start at the beginning. So this is kind of an open-ended question, but maybe you could talk about what's going on with the tariff situation and kind of the cool term that's used by the media is the trade war. So I know that there's been a lot of iterations, and it seems like, as I mentioned before, things change almost on a daily basis. But for our audience, just a quick overview, like where do things stand and what's going on right now?
Well, today's November the 1st, and we're all expecting some sort of some kind of a of an announcement anytime now from the White House. We don't know what it is, but we believe that they're going to announce a date for signing on that phase 1 deal. What everyone has to understand is that this is about ideas, right? And I keep talking about that. America is very concerned about the theft of American ideas. We're also very concerned with this new innovation economy that we've created in America. China, for their own part, has really come into their own. Anybody who's been to China in the 1970s and 80s remembers what it was like. It was not this beautiful industrialized city like it is now that could really compete with any beautiful, gleaming industrial city in Europe or the West. Shanghai's beautiful, China's beautiful. So they're, however, failing in the innovation economy, creating their own ideas. I like to always ask people, name me your favorite Chinese brand name company, and they always say Apple or Nike, and I say, no, those are American companies.
Right.
But what's happening now with this trade war is we appear to have a partial agreement on this phase 1, where the U.S. is going to be selling significant portions of agriculture to China, about $50 billion worth. There's some sort of a regulatory hurdle that's been overcome in China that will allow them to allow us to apparently take people to court over IP. I don't know how much we trust in that. Mm-hmm. And the steps to stop the joint venture program, which is how a lot of that technology is being stolen, appears to be underway. There's also a movement to lessen sanctions against certain technology companies in China, and also to allow certain American financial instruments like credit cards and financial companies to work inside of China. This is a big deal. Mm-hmm. It's a pretty big deal that we've gotten this far. The problem is it may be all we get. So when I sit around with my team of weaponized nerds and we, between talking about Sudoku and Dungeons and Dragons and we get back to work, we talk about whether or not this is all we're going to see out of Shanghai and DC. If this is as far as it's going to get, and if this will be a victory enough, and it simply won't be. We're very concerned that this will be, they'll put the flag in the ground and say, good enough. Mm-hmm. This isn't good enough. We need a lot more out of this, given all the suffering that American importers have done, and Chinese companies, for that matter. Where this supply chain starts has gone through a lot of pain.
Right. Do you see, are we at the beginning of it, the end of it, the middle of it? Because we've been hearing about all the different tariff that have been imposed, and it was in phase 1 and phase 2, and yeah. This is these rounds are coming out at this specific time. Are we kind of at the point where things are going to get resolved, or is this still going to be months and years down the road where you and I could be meeting 6 months from now and have kind of the same discussion? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I get paid by the hour, so if this takes years this would be excellent.
Then we're good.
Yeah. Yeah. I sincerely believe that we're probably in the middle. Mm-hmm. We're in the middle, and like any negotiation, that first tranche, believe it or not, is the easiest. I've struggled with my weight my entire life, and it's real easy to drop 15, 20% of your weight. It's getting beyond that's hard. And mm-hmm. this sharpening the knife and really cutting away at the bone and getting to the hard part, it's not going to be easy. There's a lot of pride happening in China. They're changing the street names now. They're taking English off and replacing them with Chinese and saying, this is China. We should really learn our language. There's a rising of national pride over who they are, and a return to this idea that people should be buying Chinese products. Think about it, right? It's a lot like here. So I believe that there could be some pushback. Really what it's going to come down to is it's an economic question. Who blinks first? Who's going to get hit with that recession first? Who's going to be the one that says, I'm going to pull back on this and possibly blink so that I don't have to worry about being the one that gets not really that is.
I like that terminology, who blinks first. So I know a lot of the discussion has been on the U.S. and China and who's going to blink first between those two countries, but there's lots of other tariffs that have been implemented from different parts of the world as well that sometimes get lost in the discussion because it's not as sexy as China, and they're taking our intel and things of that nature. So let's take a step back and say, what's the rest of the world thinking of all of this? And well, I'm going to ask you two questions. Number one, what other sanctions that would be of significance that are going on outside of China? Forget China doesn't even exist. What else is going on in the world with sanctions? And then secondly, what does the world in general think about all of this posturing and the tariff negotiations? So there's two questions for you.
I first want to thank you for using the words sexy and tariff in the same sentence. You don't even know how much that makes me happy.
Yeah, well,
my cold, dark heart.
I do my part.
Yeah, thanks, man. So what's the rest of the world? What's happening in the rest of the world, and what's the rest of the world thing? Taking China out of it. We've kicked off a trade war with Europe, which no one is talking about.
Yeah.
No one's even, go ahead, man. I dare you to turn on the news tonight and see if anybody's chatting about it. And I do apologize for all the horn honking, but I am in Midtown Manhattan on a Friday, and everyone's trying to get out of this city but me. So you can imagine the kind of, the type of just misery that's happening on there.
Yeah, no problem.
The reality is this trade war with Europe is a really big deal. So it really all comes down from a belief that America had in the early 90s that the European Union was giving financial assistance to Airbus that was not fair. They were giving them subsidies that were not fair. Turns out that the World Trade Organization agreed with us. And they not only agreed with us, they said back in the late 90s, if you guys want to go ahead and smack them with a shovel of wisdom for this, go right ahead. Mm-hmm. But we, at the time in the 90s, we didn't want to do that. And then when 9/11 happened, President Bush certainly wasn't going to do that because he had a desire to keep this coalition of people working together to try to deal with what was a real threat with terrorism. And then President Obama, of course, was not really somebody to go poking people with a sharp stick. But now we have an executive who has absolutely no problems going ahead and stirring things up, particularly because with Europe, he would like to re-engage with something called the TTIP, the Transatlantic Free Trade Agreement. But he wants to do it on our terms. He feels that the last thing that we had nearly agreed upon didn't nearly have enough in the U.S.'s interest. So he wants to get that all stirred up again, and this is a way of doing that. Now, Europe is saying that for our part, that we gave subsidies to Boeing that weren't fair. And, spoiler alert, we probably are going to end up being in a situation where we did. And the World Trade Organization is going to give Europe the right to do that. But it's going to take a while to get there. And this could be another prolonged trade war. And what's really what's interesting about this one is sooner or later, someone's going to say, I'm going after automotive, either us or Europe. When that happens, whoa, everybody, it's like it's like when a fight's about to happen. It's like, everybody just calm down, right? No reason for everyone to start throwing chairs and bottles. It's all just relax. And it's very similar in that vein. So I think you're going to see this be prolonged, but everyone knows the third rail is. Nobody wants to touch that one. You have at the same time America and India going at it because India continues to buy most of its energy from Iran. That's a real problem, but that's a lot more likely to have the gap close quickly because of the relationship that Mr. Trump and Mr. Modi have. Then you have America, who renegotiated the whole thing with NAFTA, but no one even knows if that's ever going to go anywhere because you have to have the Senate and Congress ratify this thing, and who knows what's going to happen. They're kind of busy right now trying to throw the president out of power. You have Brexit, which is that is a whole other kettle of fish. You have Mexico and China getting into it. You have the Mercosur countries melting down for one form or another, whether it's Chile or, do you see what I'm saying? It's like the whole world's on fire. The whole world's on fire with regards to trade. And I have spent my entire career trying to explain to people what I do and them saying, well, okay. But now trade is such an important part of the political discourse that people tend to want to, have a conversation about it. It's fascinating, but it's all coming to a head at once. Yeah. And I don't think we were ready for it to all come to a head at once.
Yeah, that's a great perspective, and I want to thank you for using the word hysterical whenever you're speaking about international trade. So we're using very, very good descriptors on this.
I drink a lot, man. Yeah. I think a lot of things are funny that probably shouldn't be. And for the record, this is just soda water. So
okay, I believe it. But yeah, when you put it into context just there, it's not it's U.S. China, and people kind of know NAFTA or USMCA is changing, and the fact that I use both those terms, nobody really knows exactly what's the status, right? And then and then Brexit and some of the other issues going on in the country or the world. You're right. It is absolute chaos that I think that the average consumer just may not be aware of, or to be honest, may not even care, because it doesn't directly impact them. It may indirectly, but maybe not directly. So that's a great perspective from all the things happening out there. So going back to the consumer, I'm going to shift gears a little bit. And I said, and I'm a pretty simpleton. I've been in the logistics racket for a while, but I like to keep things super simple. So if I'm Joe Blow and I'm either on a tractor in Kansas or I'm buying a new sweater or whatever, how is any of this going to impact me? And what am I going to see in my daily life with trade war negotiations on such a high level that I'm not really directly involved with any of the negotiation? I'm watching my leaders go back and forth. How is the average consumer going to be impacted? And maybe there's a couple of specific examples that you could give.
Yeah. Well, think of it this way. We were already heading towards inflation to begin with. And now many of the components that were being used for manufacture in America, for a lot of things that Americans love, like cars, are being cracked with 15, 25% tariffs. And that's going to have a follow-on effect to the end cost. Now, Joe consumer or Jane consumer doesn't necessarily see that. But if the list 4 happens, which is still entirely possible, they will see that in every facet of what they buy. The hastening of possible inflation, I think, is something that people don't realize. There's this possibility economically. So we had the job reports the other day, right? We've never had stability with unemployment like we have right now. It's incredible. But what isn't rising are wages. So at some point, what you're going to have is unemployment's going to begin to dip, and wages are going to begin to dip with it, but inflation is going to continue. And it's going to cause this morass where inflation is going to continue, and the follow-on effect of all of those extra tariffs is going to come along with it. It's going to cause even faster and broader inflation. And I don't know if the Fed has all the tools left over to do anything about it.
Right.
That's a bigger question than for someone like me.
Yeah.
That is going to be something Joe consumer feels. And second of all, where their products are coming from. A lot of people have made a conscious decision to move production from places like China to alternate areas of production. And they're places that people might be surprised by. Mexico has been a huge winner in this trade war. We have clients that have literally unbolted their machinery from the floor of their warehouses in China and moved it to Mexico and reestablished manufacturing there. Going to Indonesia, they're going to Malaysia, Vietnam, and Cambodia, where, oddly enough, many of those factories are actually owned by Chinese parent companies. So the Chinese are still making money off of that. But I believe you're going to continue to see that sort of a movement over time. You're going to continue to see. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was about to say, the speed, one of the things that I was concerned about is, okay, there's tariffs going on in China, and I'm just going to move, right? I mean, here in the U.S., you can sell your house and move in a matter of days. My brother just did it a couple of weeks ago. Bolting a piece of equipment and dealing with setup and finding another manufacturer in Cambodia to make a widget within specs, within tariff, the same. To me, that seems that's months, if not a year, to get it done right. But you just made a comment like you have customers that are just literally unbolting equipment. So maybe I'm misinformed. That to me, making that switch isn't instantaneous, but in some instances it is. Maybe elaborate on that a little bit.
It's not instantaneous. It takes a tremendous amount of time. I work with an absolute rock star here named Will Niblo. And he tells a lot of tales of people who thought it would be, who thought that shifting their manufacturing was going to be as simple as saying, I'm going to buy my cheeseburger from Burger King instead of McDonald's.
Yeah, great analogy.
And they learned real quickly that whether it was things as simple as licensing in that country, finding logistics, finding support. You had all of the logistics infrastructure you could ever desire or wish for in China. You moved everything to Indonesia. Well, the same sailings aren't happening there. There's not as much tonnage. There's not as much air freight coverage. So you find yourself behind the 8 ball trying to get stuff out of that country. He has done research and work, his team has, for people where even with the tariffs, it just made sense to stay in China, given what they would have to change and the movements that they would have to make. It didn't make as much sense for them to move when they did all the math So, or the opportunity costs even.
Yeah.
And then people who have said, to your point you just made, in order for us to unbolt everything, in order for us to give severance payments to people in our manufacturing, in order for us to deal with the recoup losses of what we've just done, we're a year into this. We should just wait it out and see what happens. We've made too much of an investment to just, walk off now.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great point. And I was thinking that that's exactly right. Okay, I make widgets overseas, and I'm like, geez, it's getting crazy, and the 18 months it's going to take me to replicate what I have now. There's an election coming up. Things may change. Yeah, I'll have to pass some costs on to my customer, but I think they'll understand because there's so much noise around this topic. I'm just going to stay put and wait it out. Sounds like after people have decided to go switch and buy a Whopper instead of a Big Mac, more companies are saying we're gonna wait it out. That's kind of what you're saying.
There are people that have done that. We're going to wait it out. There are also people who are saying the cost of that, what we could lose if the quality, are we going to be able to maintain quality over large quantities of production if we take it someplace else? I'm not willing to take that risk. Or am I willing to leave a manufacturer who's been wonderful and done everything I've asked for? And then if something goes wrong, I've got to come crawling back to these people. And are they going to be able to do it? Now, at the same time, I can give you examples of just as many of clients of ours who have said openly, they've admitted where they've said, we're leaving, the quality was great, we're making just as many at the same price, never coming back. So there will be companies that don't return to China because of this. Now, what I can tell you is I do not have a single instance. I do not have one single instance, not one example of a company who came back to the U.S.
That's interesting.
I'm sure they're out there.
Yeah. What, just out of curiosity, so you talked about the infrastructure, the quality of manufacturing. What are a couple of countries that companies are leaving for? Is it you mentioned Cambodia and Vietnam? Are those a couple? Give us an example of some countries that are set up enough that they can absorb it.
Yeah, the obvious ones were Indonesia, Malaysia, Vietnam, Cambodia, Mexico, Colombia. Colombia did very well on this thing. To agree, Eastern Europe for a lot of automotive manufacturing, in India, they both did extremely well. But here's some ones the Philippines. Now, for a long time in the 90s, when I had hair and a waist, the Philippines was a place where a lot of electronics were being made and a lot of manufacturing was being done. A tremendous amount of infrastructure is still there, and a very learned, well-educated workforce is there as well. Bangladesh did quite well out of this as well, which was a bit shocking. Parts of the Middle East, Israel did quite well from parts of this, which is a bit shocking.
Well, it truly is global because you're basically listing countries all over the world. It's not just, hey, we moved 1,000 miles south of China or inland or something. So it definitely, the entire world is. Is it certain commodities? Is it still textiles and soft goods, if that's the right term to use, that are going into the Southeast Asia, and more hard goods and automotive going over to Europe? Is there specific commodities that plug in well?
It's funny, for textiles, a lot of folks are moving to Vietnam and Cambodia because of anticipation of a free trade agreement. And that's been the case for quite some time because of the TPP. Where you're seeing a lot of harmonized code driven change. You're seeing it for automotive manufacturing, heavy equipment engineering. That's being moved just because as economies tend to grow and mature, they go from that agrarian economy, simple manufacturing, and then they start getting into more technical manufacturing and engineering towards high-tech aerospace, where China is now. And in those countries that we listed off, that's where they are these days.
Got it. That sounds great. So for our listeners, we're again with Pete Mento with Crowe LLP. We've been talking, a lot of things related to trade and logistics. And we're going to be right back, and we're going to jump in a little bit more about the uptime of logistics. And let's talk about moving widgets and things across the world, and some of the infrastructure and challenges that are happening related to the physical movement of products. So, Pete, thanks for staying with us. All right, so we're back with Uptime Logistics and our guest Pete Mento with Crowe LLP. We've had some great dialogue about the tariff changes and the global impact and things that the average consumer may not really understand or have relevance to what's going on. So we're going to shift a little bit and talk about logistics and the physical movement of products and how things move from point A to point B, even though we're now sourcing in different parts of the country or different parts of the world. So as I mentioned, I'm a pretty simpleton, so I like to kind of keep things in buckets and keep it simple. So what I'd like to do is really take the evolution or the cycle of an actual shipment and talk about the different people that touch that, from origin to the steamship lines to the final delivery, and talk about how the trade war, not only with China but in general, is making any impact, yes, no, maybe, with those entities. So for example, in China, there's manufacturing. Some are owned by the Chinese government. Some may or may not, probably not. You got the steamship lines. You got the infrastructure over there that's helping to move a good from a factory onto a port. Is anything changing with that group? Are people raising the rates? Have they pulled out capacity? Is any of that being impacted by the trade challenges that we just spoke about?
Yes, sir. And that is a broad and scary topic. So consider this. Many people, many macroeconomists have said that there's a great fear of a Chinese debt crisis.
Okay.
So imagine this, you're operating a business and all of a sudden your orders are going to go away. Or you're operating a business and your customer in the US is pushing back a 15 to 25% tariff on you and saying, you've got to eat this. Either way, your profit margins have gone way down. And now your debt that you owe to people is harder and harder for you to pay. And it helps to hasten a possible default issue. So there's a real underlying economic issue that could end up blowing up in the face of China as a whole, which has political implications. Let's put that to the side. Consider, if you will, the logistics infrastructure, okay? If the rest of the world is buying less things from China, and the rest of us buying less things, period, which appears to be the case right now, that means there's less call for bunker C fuel, which is the diesel fuel that we use in these periods. Oil costs are down through the floor right now as well. And the pricing for transportation is down, which means you've got to, as you said, take tonnage off of the water in order to maintain your prices and maintain your profitability. I believe that this is going to have in 2020 and 2021, it's going to have a crunch on the logistics company, on the carriers themselves. And then you're going to have a recession that's going to happen. They're going to get a double whammy on this. So just as we begin to get comfortable again with a more normalized global economy, you're going to have a follow-on recession. It's going to hit the rest of the world harder than the U.S. So while that's happening, it's going to have another, again, follow-on effect on the ocean carriers and the air carriers.
Gotcha.
As long as they keep rolling out new iPhones every couple of months.
Yeah, I don't think there's enough bang in a new iPhone to get the type of purchase power that Apple would need. So it sounds like if you and I own a dray company and we got trucks and we're moving product from a factory to the port, as you indicated, I'm nervous. We just bought a whole new fleet of trucks because we got more stuff coming. I'm a little bit nervous of how I'm going to pay for them, so I'm scaling back. Therefore, capacity could potentially be lower. It's more challenging to get the product to the port. Let's talk about the steamship lines. These are billion-dollar multinational corporations. What do they care about this, and what are their implications? I got a boat on the water, and I got thousands of them. How is this impacting me?
Well, they're people tend to forget that they're absolutely a monopoly, and they can do whatever they want outside of all of the antitrust laws that we have. So they'll take tonnage off the water and deal with it. They've been dealing with years and years of financial woes. This is not something that they want to have to deal with. And they've been reinvesting in their tonnage. So here they are rolling out new vessels and trying to become more and more efficient. But unfortunately, it would appear at least that they're going to the headwinds of financial difficult times, both what's going on now with this trade war and with a recession that everyone sees coming. So they're going to eat it pretty hard with regards to this. Sooner or later, it's just a question of time. Now, let's say that everyone in China is doing what the Chinese government says what they're doing, and we're selling it to everywhere but America, so don't worry about it. I have a hard time believing that the other consumer markets in the world make up for the difference of this juggernaut of consumption, which is the U.S., which is, constantly, consume whatever we get our hands on,
Right.
making up for it that way. It's just simply not going to happen. And these steamship lines cannot redeploy their services fast enough to get to where they need to be in order to take advantage of those markets. I don't believe it. I don't believe it.
Mm-hmm. Do you think there'll be any consolidation in the industry?
Yeah.
Like you said that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's going to keep going. Yeah, it just makes financial sense for them to continue to consolidate. There's nothing stopping them. There's no regulatory body that's going to be able to stop them.
Right.
So yes, I absolutely think there will be.
So if there's no regulatory body, and okay, so we now need to charge just like they've done for decades with peak season surcharges and stuff. So the steamship line says, we're just going to raise, as a monopoly, everybody raise your container rates by $500, and that solves all the problems. Do you see that type of thing happening?
I do. Here's the dirty truth. Okay, we as consumers of logistics did this to ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
We constantly drove value out of logistics and pushed people down to price. And when we did that, and we said the only thing we care about is turning this into a commodity, we allowed an ocean container to be nothing more than a reusable commodity, nothing more different than pork bellies and orange juice. And when we did that, we took value out of it, it allowed these guys to consolidate. A box is a box, a ship is a ship, a route is a route. And then when technology came on top of that, it gave transparency to the rates. And when you put those two things together, you force these guys to conglomerate themselves in order to make what little money they can off of volume. Mm-hmm. When you have fewer and fewer choices, your price goes higher and higher. It's simply supply and demand. And anybody watching this or listening to it, learn that in their freshman economics class. You did this to yourself.
Right.
You are, without realizing it, rationalizing the number of providers and the number of NVOCCs by taking value out of the choice.
That's a good point.
Well, it's depressing. Oof.
Yeah, you kind of bummed me out there. I wasn't sure what my next question was going to be. I'm like, oh, that's a sobering thought.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, that's okay. So let's talk about the three-prong of this. We talked about you and I own a trucking company over in China, and we have our concerns with the debt we have to manage, and we're not sure if we're going to continue to fill those trucks. We just talked about the steamship lines and some of the challenge that they're going through. Let's talk about the guys that we see on a daily basis over here in the U.S. I'm talking about drayage companies, the ports, things of that nature. Some of the topics that you just mentioned may still overlay and have those same type of concerns, but talk about that group of those three segments, what's happening with that group here in the U.S. and how they're changing their approach and some of their concerns with that final mile.
Well, on the final mile thing, the trucking companies have had just a stranglehold on pricing, and a lot of that has to do with just a lack in availability of qualified drivers. And I don't see that changing anytime soon. I think what we all need to understand as consumers of transportation is that the drivers are deciding whether or not our customers are going to get their goods. Mm-hmm. The drivers are deciding what the prices are. And I think we're fools if we don't come to grips with that. So there's that. And I think this trade war has very little to do with their situation in that, other than the fact that it might get a little cheaper for them because the price of gas should go down as we have, downward pressure on transportation. Yep. Forwarders, on the other hand, I think that they've been extremely savvy. So when I've worked for a whole lot of forwarders, and boy, that's a scary thing to say, right? In my career, I've been a mercenary. I've gone wherever the cash is because I've got alimony to pay for. One thing I'll tell you is working around the senior leadership of these major monolithic big names in the industry, these guys see it when it's coming. The big forwarders, particularly the big American forwarders, they know when winter is coming, and they make smart decisions about how they deploy their limited resources, how they actually contract their spending, and they make good decisions about what they do with their money. So I think that they're going to be just fine. And one way or the other, because they're middlemen, they're going to make their money.
Right.
I'm more concerned with the ocean carriers and the air carriers and their ability to maintain themselves in this environment where they're being just beaten down to the point where, their margins are razor thin at this point.
Interesting.
Truckers, as long as no one wants to drive them, they're making their own prices.
Yeah. Yeah, we've had several discussions on Uptime about the driver shortages and just the flat out realities. And everybody asks why. And then the next question is, would you be interested in driving a truck as a career? And more the answer is no, thank you. So
that's a hard life.
Yeah.
One more thing I'd like to add is warehousing, right? So as economies tend to go down, my last place that I worked at Crane Worldwide, over the course of the past couple of years, Mr. Crane's made some significant investments in building new warehouses, and people would think, why would you do that? Well, he was building them in very strategic places where there wasn't a lot of warehouse coverage. And you're going to see that with a lot of logistics firms. They're building warehouse spaces in places where there isn't a lot of warehousing right now. Well, why? Because when downturns in the economy happen and there's an overage or surplus of inventory, it's got to go somewhere. Mm-hmm. And people wait out the economic storm. And warehouse space ends up coming at a real premium. So you're going to find that warehouse space is going to get expensive in a down economy, which seems counterintuitive, but it is how it works.
Yeah. Well, being here in Colorado, counterintuitive and unintended consequences when the legalization of cannabis came around, commercial real estate just went gangbusters. And my day job is in warehousing, and people are like, why is it so expensive in Denver? And then I said, do you know what weed is legal here? And then they're like, oh yeah, okay, I get it now. So I think once you draw the line there that you just did, you can definitely see it's relevant. So that's a good.
Well, isn't everybody high so they don't care about prices?
I'm high right now, Pete. So we just got to keep that down. So no, but it's crazy in Colorado, and I know you do quite a bit of traveling and have been out here. And I'll tell you what, I can't even imagine whenever the gas turns on in California, that's already an expensive market. That when people start growing marijuana out there on big time scale, that place is gonna be crazy, if you ask me.
Yeah.
What are some other things that importers and companies are doing to mitigate? We talked about how warehousing is changing. What about people hear the term tariff engineering, and then also a subset of warehousing is foreign trade zones and things of that nature. Are those coming around as people are interested in those now? And so maybe talk about what tariff engineering is. Are people using it? And then are people using free trade zones? And maybe talk about that.
Yeah. So, I would love to sit here and tell you that what I do is it takes a really sharp wit, and it doesn't. For the things that I do, it just takes exposure. And over time, you see enough stuff and you remember it. And, the tariff is big. There's thousands and thousands of things in the tariff. But if you get exposed to enough stuff over enough amount of time, you eventually hear just about everything under the sun you could apply to get someone out of trouble. So you can change what something is called, which is the tariff stuff you talked about. Mm-hmm. You can change how we apply value, which is manipulating what something is worth when it comes across a border. Or you can change the rules that apply to it, which is legislative relief, free trade agreements, and that kind of stuff. Foreign trade zones are an interesting one. Now, zones don't really help you here because the 301 tariffs, the way they were written, if you put something into a zone, no matter when you take it out, 20 years from now, you're still gonna have to pay those 301 tariffs, which was some dirty pool, in my opinion. Whoever wrote this thing must have had it out for importers. Either that or they were one heck of a good writer, because, man, when I saw that, I stood up and I did like a slow golf clap. I was like, well done, well played. I mean, that was, but starting on the classification side of it, what is a thing? If you're able to make a minor change in a product, it could change the way it's classified. And it may take it out of one of those lists that would otherwise require it to be, subject to a tariff. Mm-hmm. It may be that you've had it classified wrong the whole time. And that could be great news, right? Like, oh, that's wonderful. I've had it classified as X and it turns out that it was Y. Okay, well, you're paying 3% on it forever, and it wasn't subject to these 301s. Wonderful. Well, now you find out that it's classified as Y, and it isn't subject to the 301s, but it's not 3%, it's 8% ad valorem. All right, well, cool. Well, you got to go back for the last 5 years and pay what you owe the government. Wow. And then going forward, when these 301s go away, you got to pay it too. So, the broker giveth and the broker taketh away. It's not always good news, man. It's it can be frustrating finding out that there's a positive piece of this. And tariffs, 90% of classification, honestly, is taking the time to be able to make a good argument over why you think something is what it is, and being able to reasonably explain it to someone at CBP so that they agree with you. It's half science, baby. You know, so that's tariff engineering in a nutshell. And then on the valuation side, you've got the first sale process where if it turns out that you bought something and it was actually manufactured by someone before you bought it from them, which happens a lot in retail, you can use that first sale invoice. There are people who are recovering duties through drawback. If you import this stuff and you pay a 301 tariff on it and you eventually re-export it, you can go back and we can get those tariffs through the duty drawback process. Now we have the MTB, the miscellaneous tariff bill, that closes in early December. But if you pay less than $500,000 of ad valorem tariffs, regular tariffs, on a product, and you have no domestic competition on those products, you can ask Congress to give you a duty-free exemption for 3 years. No one does it. Barely anybody does it. I mean, we do it because I'm pretty sinister that way. I'm going to find you. I hate paying the man. I'm going to find you your money. But most importers, they don't bother. Yeah. So that's on the U.S. side. Now, remember, in China, if you're exporting to China, they have punitive tariffs too. So there's an exclusion process in China to get out of paying the tariffs. Barely anybody is bothering to do it. And then I question how controversial it must be, because the United States, for all of our faults, we don't have the level of corruption that you have in China with regards to customs. So we have worked with people in regards to getting, working towards exemptions. I've not seen any issues of corruption, but I have heard that it does exist with regards to the process. I have, got my fears as far as that goes. Am I talking too much again?
No, you're doing great. It's interesting stuff. So let's talk about Incoterms. And there's all different ways you can take ownership and possession and control as you import. Looking at the Incoterms, I know they just changed literally just a few months ago. I know they review them every 10 years or so. Does changing Incoterms, so I'm an importer of a widget, and I'm like, hey, I used to do DDP, now I want to go X works. Is there any value or benefit to look at your Incoterms as an importer during this trade war? Yep.
Yeah. So you're a gentleman who has advanced past the years of teenage years. You remember the good old days. When we were younger men. And do you remember all those stupid games that we played in elementary school, like hot potato?
Yes.
All right. So there was this game that you played where when the music stopped, whoever had the hot potato lost. Right. Yep. And there was another one called concentration, where you had to put these little spaces in the right spots before the timer went up, or everything blew up in your face. Incoterms can be a lot like hot potato or concentration. At the end, who's ever got a hold of this thing is stuck with it. You're stuck with the responsibility for insurance, responsibility for care of the goods, responsibility for the duties and transportation costs. So if you can convince some other poor schlep to take responsibility for it, good on you. But the reality is, in 2019 and 2020, this is kind of a big topic. So convincing someone else to take responsibility for the tariff is actually hard to do. Now, many companies have pulled it off. They have told their foreign vendors, you're going to deliver this stuff DDP, and you're going to swallow this tariff and find a way to make it work. That ain't my problem. God bless them. But a lot of folks they've been unable to make that change. But if you can do it, power to the people, man. Yeah,
interesting. A couple more questions, then we'll kind of wrap it up. I got 3 final questions, but one more comment. Technology in a lot of the Uptime shows, we've talked about how it's impacted hours of service in the trucking industry and visibility and transparency just in the tracking and tracing on the domestic side. Is there any, technologies, the human nature, where there's a will, there's a way. And if there's a problem that's trying to be overcome, somebody will try to make a buck off of it or come up with some new cool technology that will fix a problem. I don't know if you've seen any companies taking, and I won't say advantage because that's somewhat of a negative term, and I'm not trying for it to be negative, but is there anything out there that's popped up in the last 18 months that's technology related that is helping this whole process that we've been talking about?
What's crazy is it's not that it's popped up in the last 18 months. It's that the the utility of the product has really taken a whole new direction. So all of these companies that made investments in global trade management software to understand landed cost, they've really brought on a whole new fantastic part for making that investment. So they can suddenly now figure out, okay, well, I don't want to make it in China anymore. Where's the next best place to do this from? And this global trade management software can help them to make that intelligent decision. And there's a lot of providers out there that make that software. And I got a lot of friends that sell a lot of different types of it. So I don't really want to plug one over the other, but making that investment for that ERP system has really paid off for a lot of folks.
Got it.
And a lot of people who wish that they would have by now.
Yeah. Yeah, so no magic wand or here's a new thing that's going to revolutionize or fix a problem. It's just utilizing technology and services that may already exist to help you make the right decision. So last question, and then we'll have a little fun here at the end. What type of resources? So I'm listening to this podcast, and I'm really getting a lot of knowledge, and I'm like, wow, I need to really analyze my supply chain and think about doing things differently. Yep. What are some resources specifically, like maybe some websites people could go to, or different, something very tangible that I can walk away with and say, I need to reach out to this person or this website so I can understand my options as an importer?
Totally. So you should absolutely be hitting up the USTR website. There's a lot of great information that's available there, and it is probably one of the best places to go for up-to-the-minute information. They do a very good job of keeping it up to date. Mm-hmm. Also to find out if you have an exemption that you may be able to use for your product. A lot of folks don't realize that there are exemptions out there that may qualify on their product. So that's a good place to start. I'm a big fan of the World Trade Centers, and they have a lot of wonderful people there that are able to help you. So going out to the World Trade Centers and their local websites, a fantastic place to go. ICPA, International Compliance Professionals Association, their website is just a wonderful place to get information. Certainly, LinkedIn and the information that I put out there, not to plug myself too hard, but and then trade school. We do whatever we can to put up as much information as we can on a biweekly basis. We have a live. We did one today, as a matter of fact. We have a live every other week training. We ask questions, we take questions, and it's really a non-political, non-biased, non-partisan discussion of issues of international trade.
Gotcha.
But I think really the best thing that someone can do to get themselves really in the right position with regards to trade is to seek out as much information as they can and to do their best to not be Chicken Little, but to let people know that there are things that could affect them down the road. Yeah. It's definitely an ounce prevention kind of business.
Yeah, for sure. And the World Trade Center here in Denver, WTC Denver, .org is a phenomenal group. So if you're listening here locally, please reach out to the group here in Colorado. They're a phenomenal group to work with. All right, so I got two questions for you, and then I'll let you enjoy your Friday afternoon in Manhattan. So here's the first one. You need to fill in the blank on this question. Global trade is heading for ... and your answer?
Global trade is heading for even more chaos. I think that as crazy as things are now, it's really only been crazy with a limited number of jurisdictions. And although the US and China and Europe are big ones, I think you're going to see even more of this madness in a whole lot of other countries coming up. So where you crash on the kids, it's just going to get nuttier.
Gotcha. And the last one would be if I were a company that was importing product from China, I would
pull my iTrack data or get on the ACE program as quickly as I could. iTrack is the importer trade activity reports. You can get them for about $250 for customs directly. You send them a FOIA request on your letterhead, and in about 3 weeks, they will send you every single import that you've done in the past 5 years. Or you can get on the ACE protocol and run the same reports for free from the government. These are both government resources. Your tax dollars have paid for them. You should get your money's worth. And they will tell you everything about you as an importer. You're not going to be able to really strike and figure out what to do from a strategy standpoint until you know specifically from a statistical standpoint what it is you're working with.
Got it.
And then once you've done that, have a good sit down with a good broker and put together a strategy on how to tackle this thing. You should, on an annual basis, look at your duty burden, regardless of the trade war, and make a decision about how you plan on tackling it. And if you're a multi-jurisdictional organization, which means you're importing around the world, every couple of years, you should do a global analysis on duty and VAT and try to figure out how to save yourself money. You know, you shouldn't sit back and feel victimized on duties. You should try to find a way to get on top of those.
All right.
Need help? You know who to call.
Nice. I like it. That's a perfect note to end on. Pete, I can't thank you enough. You and I have known each other for a couple of years, and every time I hear you speak, it's just, you simplify things. I'm a simple guy. I just need to dumb it down, and you do a good job of that. So thanks for dumbing it down for us.
It was my pleasure, and I'll come back anytime at all.
Excellent. All right. Thanks again, Pete. Have a good one.
You too.
All right. And thank you for joining us today on Uptime Logistics, powered by CAP Logistics. You can find more information about the show in the description below. And don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. And please visit caplogistics.com for customized transportation solutions. Everybody have a great day.